Welcome everybody to tonight's off-road workshop. Appreciate you guys coming. Tonight we're gonna talk about how to manage all the junk in the trunk of your vehicles. So I'm gonna cover kind of three main topics. We're gonna go over weight distribution and kind of how to consider that when you're loading your vehicle. We're gonna talk about just proper storage and securing your gear so it doesn't surprise you in a bad way. And then finally, we're gonna talk about a little bit on just some notes on suspension, things to consider, things you can adjust and tweak and modify, and some kind of best practices, and a bit of process that I like to go through for all these things. So let's start with weight distribution. So when you're loading up your vehicle for any trip, and this really honestly goes for anything, you know, trip to Home Depot, long drive, cross state, big camping trip, whatever, always think about optimal weight distribution. Vehicles are happiest when you have most of the weight in between the two axles, in between the front and the rear. When you overload one end of the vehicle, so I'll use, you know, to an extreme, if you overload like a pickup where the rear is just slammed all the way down to the bump stops, the front end is actually gonna start lifting and you're gonna start countering the weight of the engine, and your steering will get really, really light. And if you go over a bump and then need to make an emergency steer, nothing could happen and you could just keep plowing forward. So, and most of your braking power comes from your front end, right? So if you have all the weight in the rear, sometimes it's hard to get the weight shift under an emergency braking scenario, and you know, you're not gonna have good braking power, right? The tires are not gonna be gripping the ground as well as they should be. So, and then also to the front, like if you have the front of the vehicle just grossly overweighted and nothing in the back, the other issue is going to be then now you have all this weight over the steering that's going to affect your ability to steer. You're going to have a lot of understeer, which means basically when you turn the wheel, the truck's just going to go lean hard into it, and it's going to probably skid and slide a little bit before you get grip and it actually turns. So because you have so much weight, you're just overdriving the ability of that vehicle to handle properly. So, and then just general cornering, the vehicle is just going to be much more unsettling, and honestly, not very confidence inspiring in corners, you know, on the highway, on the trail, and then, you know, it's going to cause you to potentially lose control of the vehicle in extreme scenarios. So weight distribution is crucial. Now that's weight distribution on a kind of fore and aft, a linear, horizontal. Let's talk about vertical weight distribution. So another thing you want to consider is how high in the vehicle is that weight stored. So roof racks are awesome. We've got a big old roof rack here. We've got a tent and everything up top. Great place for those kind of things. But things to consider are, is there enough weight down low in this thing to help kind of counter all the weight that's up high? Basically what happens is if you have too much weight up high and no weight down low, the vehicle is top heavy. So when you're on a trail and a little kind of an off camber side slope or whatever, the vehicle has a greater risk of actually tipping over, which is not a good day. You don't want to have a rollover in your truck or vehicle, whatever. The other thing is just general driving and cornering. It affects the vehicle dynamics, just like too much weight front to rear. High weight makes the vehicle really kind of roll in the corners, and it's kind of a bit sketchy. Unless you want to be a stunt driver and work on your two-wheel, you know, stunt driving, then I recommend being considerate of weight up high. So what that means is, if you can, you know, heavy things like water cans, gas cans, all that kind of stuff are happier. Your vehicle will be happier when it's down low. A good example of this is, think of electric vehicles nowadays. Those big battery arrays are down in the seat pan bottom of the vehicle as low as they possibly can get it, and also in between the two axles, because that is the best place to put that weight. That makes those vehicles just handle so much better. So when you're loading your truck, don't try to put a ton of heavy stuff up top. I mean, honestly, tents are fine, but just be cognizant of, you know, how much that tent weighs, how much your roof rack is rated for. Let's talk about roof racks for a second. Good things to know about roof racks, be it a factory rack, you know, from the manufacturer, or an aftermarket rack, is, and this really goes for factory racks because they're all kind of wimpy, but most actually just about all factory racks that I'm aware of, will have two ratings. One is called a static weight load limit and a dynamic weight load limit. And sometimes they publish it, like this 4Runner, the Toyota roof rack that came on it, I think had a little stamp or a little sticker on the inside of one of the upright towers that had those two figures in it. Usually you can find it in your owner's manual. Sometimes you gotta do a little Google searching, but it's good to know those figures because let's say, for an example, your factory roof rack has a 100-pound dynamic weight load limit. What that means is when the vehicle's driving and cruising down the road or cruising down the trail, that rack is tested and rated and certified to 100 pounds up top. Anything more than that, and then that rack, you're starting to exceed the manufacturer's specification for what that rack can handle, which means you run the risk of whatever's up top ceasing to be part of the vehicle at some point, you know, in extreme scenarios. So it could fall off, it could break off, your rack could break, it could damage something. So dynamic load rating is anytime the vehicle's in motion. And that load rating is usually much, much less than the static load rating. Static load rating is when the vehicle's not in motion. It's just when you're sitting there in camp and you've got your tent on there and you're in there and it's all good to go. So static load ratings are usually way, way more because it just doesn't matter as much. The vehicle's not in motion. Does that make sense? Good to know if you're doing anything on a factory roof rack. Good to know on aftermarket racks. Most aftermarket roof racks, like this one or really any other brand that are kind of in this off-road space, are going to have a way greater static load rating than the actual roof of the vehicle. I mean, our rack, for example, you could take this 4Runner, put it upside down, and rest it on the rack, and the rack would just kind of sit there and be like, cool, what else you got? So most racks are way overbuilt, aftermarket racks are way overbuilt for the vehicle that they're on. The roof will usually fail before the rack does. So just things to consider. So that's kind of weight distribution in a general sense. Anytime I load my truck, I always think, okay, heavy things down low as best as possible. So like my tools, you know, my water cans, anything that's just big and heavy, I try to bury as low as possible and as centralized in the vehicle as possible. It's not always gonna be perfect, so don't worry about it. Just try to have that as sort of a discipline that you kind of always go through, a mental process when you're loading your vehicle. Heavy things down low, centralized in between the two axles if at all possible. Now, you've got a 4-door vehicle here. You're gonna have a driver and passenger in front. You may have two adults in the back, right? That's a fair bit of weight in between the two axles, but then you're like, well, I have no other place to put stuff except in the rear. Cool, no big deal, right? You just, again, same principles. Even though it's all over the rear axle, at least you're gonna put heavy stuff down low, sleeping bags and lighter things up top, and just kind of follow that procedure. So weight distribution is the difference between having a safe, comfortable driving experience versus a unsafe, sketchy driving experience when you're on the trail and driving around town. One last thing is if you are grossly overloaded either to the rear or to the front, you also run the risk of bottoming out the spring. So the vehicle will, on a big dip or a big pothole or something, the suspension will actually compress to the point where you'll hit what's called a bump stop. And that's just usually a rubber pad that's front and rear axles to absorb the extreme compression of a shock and spring under heavy load. And when you're what I call riding the bump stops a lot on a trip, especially if you're going down a long, nasty washboard or through some whoop-de-doos, two things: slow down so you're not hitting as hard, because every time you hit, you're compressing your discs in your spine. So unless you're into that sort of torturous thing, don't do that. But two, it's also really hard in the truck. So if your spine's hurting, the truck's probably hurting too. So don't ride the bump stops. Just slow the vehicle down if you can, and either pick a different line or something. But we'll talk more on how to fix that later on in this discussion, because there are some very good little fixes you can do that are pretty inexpensive. I'll talk about some process there. All right, so now we know where to put stuff. Let's talk about how to put stuff away in the vehicle. So I know that I'm going to put stuff up top on my roof, I like to put, sleeping bags and pillows and the light stuff up top. So I'll have some kind of waterproof case, something like this guy, or a flat, low, whatever, some kind of waterproof case that's dustproof, weatherproof, whatever, that I can put up on the roof to keep those things dry, but it's lightweight and it's good to go. Now with the rack, when you do anything on the outside of the vehicle, secure it with some good ratchet straps. Something that goes click, 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 and you can ratchet down nice and tight. And when I set off on a trip, I'll ratchet everything in the driveway. I'll drive down to the end of my road, or you could drive a few miles, whatever. Just give it some time to go, settle under the drive, and get out and just double check your straps. Anytime you go to a gas station, get out, double check your ratchet straps, because things just shift and move and can start loosening up. And it's better to catch them when they're a click or two loose than when it's like starting to slide and shift. Because the last thing you want is to go over a bump and let's see in the rearview mirror, oh, there goes my case of everything, cool. Because that could fly off and go through somebody's windshield on the freeway, or fly off and roll down a cliff when you're on the trail, and then you have to go chasing after it. And that's not fun. So you want to think about how you're going to secure your equipment. Anything that's kind of small and loose inside the vehicle, I just like to try to put it into a pouch, a case, a box, anything that, or drawer. You've got stuff like this where you can put into the drawers if you really want to get, fancy. But secure things into something to where, worst case scenario, if the vehicle rolls over due to whatever, right? Deer runs out in front of you, whatever. You have a nasty rollover crash. The last thing you want is heavy objects inside the vehicle to turn into missiles and smack you in the face or whatever. It could be extremely dangerous. So you just want things secured. I like to keep a big old flashlight next to my driver's seat, but I have like a little quick fist mount that kind of goes into and straps in so it doesn't become a missile, because that flashlight, it's only that big, but if that thing goes flying, it could knock me out, and then I'm in a bad place. So even things as simple as that, just try to have them secured. I've done a lot of like rollover training and vehicle extrication training with my search and rescue time, and it's amazing. We'll put just all the normal stuff inside a simulator vehicle that's on a rolling apparatus, like your cell phone and just keys and hat and t-shirt in the back, or a backpack, just all kinds of stuff that you would normally just have sort of in cubbies and in different places in your vehicle. And we'll then roll the vehicle over in a controlled manner in this apparatus. And it's amazing when you're strapped in that seat in the simulator and how stuff just is raining down around you. And we've got a helmet on and a face shield and everything, so we're protected, but it's just like you're just getting covered in stuff as you're rolling in the simulator. And it's just like your normal stuff, like keys smacking you in the face, really hurts. So just be cognizant of that. So try to find some kind of, zippered pouch, cases, again, things like that you can just get stuff secured into. I'm a big fan of anchor track. If you're outfitting the back end of a vehicle, anchor track is fantastic. If you've got a pickup, this stuff is fantastic. This is basically aircraft seat track. If you go on an airplane and you're feeling like being arrested, go ahead and peel up the carpet in the airplane, and you'll see this seat track holding all the seats down in an aircraft. Don't actually do that, because that would be a bad day. But sometimes you can fly on an older plane where the carpet is being peeled up, and you'd be like, oh, I recognize that stuff. It's all just beefy aluminum track, and you've got these little quick disconnects that you can put in any one of these little spots and create an anchor point. And these are all load rated, so you can put down some serious gear on this and have it locked in place. These are great for cargo trailers, utility trailers. Great for, if you've got a drawer system, on the top deck of the drawers in the back of the car. Just a great thing that you can attach to the inside the vehicle, inside the bed of your pickup, on the bottom of the pickup, and have anchor points everywhere. They usually come in different lengths. We have them in 1 and 2 foot sticks, but you can find them in all kinds. You can get huge lengths of the stuff. So, but just ways to tie down using good ratchet straps to secure things in place. So, storing stuff is the key to success. The other thing is, the last thing you want is when you get into camp and you open up your rear hatch, it's just a yard sale that just comes tumbling out. I just think of like the old, like Bugs Bunny cartoon where he opens like the closet door and it's just like cascade of like toys and stuff and he's buried underneath the pile. Same kind of thing in the back of the rig. So, you want things to be secured so when I open the hatch, I don't get any surprises. So inside some drawers, if you have a heavy thing like a fridge, strap that sucker down. That's a giant missile that'll take your head off if you roll over. So make sure fridges are strapped down, either on a slide or just strapped down to, like your factory anchor points. Most SUVs are going to have anchor points in the back. Jeeps do, pickups do even. I mean, everything has some kind of basic anchor points. Just use those at least. Another little thing I absolutely love is you're always going to have sweatshirts and extra just clothing and apparel kind of squirreled away in your car. A great place in the vehicle that's unused is kind of right in up here in between the grab handles for the rear passenger and kind of right in here. And just about every SUV is going to have just this sort of empty space up in the ceiling. There's a company called Blue Ridge Overland that makes what's called an attic storage system. And it's this nice small mesh net with a 550 cord drawstring. And it's got these loops that loop around to the grab handles and other anchor points up in the roof there. And it just creates this nice sort of mesh attic that's fantastic for just stuffing sweatshirts, coats, jackets, just your rain gear. If you got kids, you can put their little toys and blankets and things up there. And it's just lightweight stuff that's up high, which is fine, right? But it's out of the way and it's secure and it's not going to go flying around and create a big mess. And you can always find it. It's always in a good spot. Another thing I like too is for all like little small stuff like extra batteries and cables and flashlights and just all those kind of things. Lots of companies that make seat back panel organizers that are great, behind your driver's seat or passenger seat. I like to have both. So if I'm driving, I can reach to the back of the passenger seat, grab things out of the pouches there, usually snacks, but just stuff like that. And then the passenger behind the driver's seat can grab stuff, out of that one. Or, when you get out of your door, you open up the passenger door and you can, get some goodies out as well. So great thing for organizing spare batteries, extra radios, just whatever. All the small stuff that, again, will really, really hurt if it comes flinging at you. Especially if you go over a big bump, that stuff could just go flying and hit you in the face. So not ideal. All about just getting creative. There's lots of companies, including like Blue Ridge Overland Gear, and just tons of companies that make these just little pouches, little storage things that are a great use of just unused space in the vehicle that you can just squirrel stuff away and just keep things secure. So always, always, always good to do. All right, kind of the big thing now is how do we fix it? We're loaded down, we've loaded up for a long weekend or a long trip, and the vehicle, you can kind of see it sagging either to the rear or to the front, or it's leaning to one side or the other. You can just tell that, when your vehicle's heavy, right? You can just feel it when you're driving. You're just like, oh, it doesn't quite accelerate, or whoa, I step on the brake and it takes a little bit more time to slow it down. You can feel it as a driver. We all know our vehicles. So how do we fix it? One thing I like to do, and I'll kind of back up a little bit at the very beginning, is before I pack up for that trip, if my vehicle is just a stock vehicle, even if it's modified, this is just a good practice to do and good way to keep track of your vehicle and how it's sitting, is I like to take a tape measure and I'll measure from the center of my wheel, not the ground, but the center of the wheel, straight up to the bottom of the fender. And I'll do that for all four corners, and I'll just record it in my phone as a note, front right, front left, rear right, rear left. And the reason I don't go to the ground is because that then adds a variable called your tire, which is tire pressure. Try to do this on even ground, on the street or in the parking lot and on your driveway, just flat ground. But go from the center of the wheel to the top of this, because that's hard point to hard point, and it eliminates the soft, big, rubbery air cushion as a variable. Once you have that for all four corners, let's just say hypothetically I'm 23 inches in the front and I'm 23 3/4 in the rear. So I know my vehicle has a nice 3/4 inch rake, which is great, right, for any pickup or SUV, because when you load the rear, You want the rear to settle down to level when it's fully loaded. You don't want it to settle down below level, and now your headlights are shining up in the air. So the only way you're gonna know that is, like perfectly, is by measurements. Our eyeballs are only calibrated to about 1/4 to 1/8 inch accuracy. Some may think their eyeballs are calibrated better than others. A tape measure doesn't lie. And if you're disciplined to go from center hub to wheel arch, you could even go from the lip of the wheel, but I just like to go to the center, to the top of the wheel arch, all 4 corners. So load your vehicle up after you've done the measurements, remeasure again. Did my vehicle sag more in the rear? Did it sag a little bit in the front? Did it sag evenly? That'll tell you how you did on your weight distribution, right? Rule number 1, weight distribution. That'll tell you, do I have negative rake or do I still have positive rake? Or am I pretty dead neutral? So that'll give you data that you can work with. Once we have good data, we can make some very smart, accurate decisions on how to fix things. So let's talk about dealing with sag. Lots of good ways to go about it. You guys may know of a lot of the tricks, but if you have that data, you'll know how much you need to correct for, and you'll know where you need to correct for. So let's say this thing's fully loaded, and I'm sagging a 1/2 inch in the rear, and I'm also leaning a 1/2 inch to the left, right? We've got a little bit of a list to the port side. So how do we correct that? Well, this particular video, so you gotta kind of know your suspension components a bit, or take it to a place that can help you with it. But this particular vehicle is gonna have an adjustable strut in the front and just good old standard coils and a solid axle in the rear. So with your strut in the front, if you have an adjustable one like this, even if you have a fixed one, there's still little things you can do. So with a coilover strut, there's sort of a 2-to-1 ratio. So basically for every bit of adjustment I do on my spring seat height, I'll get a doubling effect on the net gain. So again, let's go back to our example. We're listing a 1/2 inch to the left. So I want to bring the left up a bit. In the front, I can adjust that. If I adjust that, my spring seat, so I'll take my coil over, I'll measure from the center of the eyelet up to the bottom of the spring seat here, right at the bottom of this plate. And I see, oh, it's set to 8 inches. Well, if I need to correct for a 1/2 inch, I'll set that to 8 1/4 inches. So I'll add a 1/4 inch, and that'll give me a 1/2 inch bump. It has a doubling effect. So every bit you adjust on here will double the actual correction based on spring preload. Kind of just a general rule. Good to know if you're into adjusting suspension. Good to just know in general anyway that you can help communicate to a mechanic that's going to do it for you or whatever. Just takes the guesswork. You can just say, hey, I'd like a 1/4 inch more preload on my driver's side. And you know in your brain, oh, cool, that'll give me a 1/2 inch of correction. So that's how you can do it with an adjustable coilover. Another way you can do it, let's say you're a Jeep, you got a solid front axle, you just have shocks and coils. Lots of companies make what's called a trim packer. So instead of going up a whole new spring rate, you can just sometimes correct with a polyurethane trim packer that can, depending on the vehicle, they usually go on top of the coil most times. And I think this one was 20 millimeters of thickness, so that gives you a fair bit of bump. We like using these on vehicles like that because if you don't have enough weight to justify going up a whole nother level in spring rate, swapping out springs to like some heavy loads, and you just need a little bit, you can put something like this in. These work in the front, these work in the rear. Really, really good for correcting list, which is side to side, or correcting rake. If your vehicle's sagging in the rear and you got coil springs, actually this one would mount upside down. It would just sit on top of that, and your spring goes back into your truck, and that gives you that little bit of correction. Super, super handy to do. Back to the front struts, if you have just regular struts that don't have adjustments, you can often put these little trim packers in. Same kind of principle. They come in 5, 10, and 15 millimeter thicknesses. If I need to, again, switching it to metric, if I need to do a 20 millimeter bump, I'm going to add a 10 millimeter trim packer because that increases that preload on that coil, right? Gives me that doubling effect, and we're back to level. And once you make a suspension adjustment, do your measurements again. Verify your data. record the new data set and be like, cool, I'm now at this, this, and this. It's really, really good to do before you lift and modify a vehicle. Just measure it stock, see how it is stock. Anytime you're gonna add an accessory like a tent, drawers, a bumper, and a winch, anytime you add any accessory of significant weight, and I'll usually say significant weight for vehicles, 50 pounds or more, anytime you add an accessory, just measure all four corners before you add the accessory, put your accessory on, get excited, and then measure again what changed. Did my vehicle start sag a little bit? Did it pitch to one side? What changed? Cool, it changed, or cool, it didn't, and then you can figure that out. Now, if you've got leaf springs, front or rear, and this goes for a lot of pickups, whatever, there's ways you can go about it. It's less precise, depending on what you use. It could be as simple or as complicated as you want. You've all heard of airbag systems in pickups. A lot of big towing rigs will use an airbag system in the rear. Great way to just, with the pressure of air, they'll put a bag sitting on top of the leaf pack, and the more pressure it adds, the more it'll basically add a little bit of preload to the leaf pack and support that weight, and you can adjust it, with air pressure. Pretty simple, but does require, obviously, an air compressor. Sometimes you need to change it in the field. The other bummer is with airbag systems is it's a giant balloon. At some point, it's gonna fail. They all do. It could be 15 years, could be 20 years, could be 15 miles. But at some point, an airbag is gonna give up the ghost. I've yet to find one that's will just last forever. It may exist out there, but I just haven't had experience with it. So just know that airbag systems are great, but if you're using your vehicle a lot off-road and putting it through some hard trails and things like that, and even just long stretches of washboard or whatever, airbag is a little bit more of a complicated system and could fail at some point. Just have that in the back of your head. And once you understand that, no worries there. So airbags could also work with coil sprung vehicles too. Lots of ways. They just put them inside the coil. The other thing, so with leaf spring vehicles too, you could do a full add-a-leaf. You could even upgrade the entire leaf pack. You could add something as simple as like a helper spring. That's a mechanical adjustable thing. Uses basically two different U-bolts. One holds it in the front edge in place. The other one draws down on that leaf, that spring steel, which adds more preload to the leaf pack. And you just use an impact gun. You just go burp, burp, burp on the U-bolt, and you'll draw it down, and you'll see your pickup level back out. Really, really handy. It's just mechanical. You could do a wrench, whatever. That's for like fine-tuning adjustments. If you found you've added so much weight that you're just like, wow, I just sagged the back of the vehicle like an inch and a half, drastic, 2 inches, whatever, and you're just really, really sagging. That's the vehicle saying, hey, it's probably time for a spring upgrade. So that's a little bit more money. Most sets of coil springs are, around the $200 mark or less. Leaf packs can be a bit more. They can be a bit less. It just depends on your vehicle. Depends on what type of springs you have. But understanding that you can correct it with springs, understanding that it could be as simple as an add-a-leaf, a trim packer, or a full coil upgrade. What you're doing is when you upgrade to a heavier coil, you're just increasing your spring rate. And that's just a calculation of a bunch of different things, of the thickness of the wire itself, the height of the coil, lots of different things. I won't go into the maths. But basically, springs are all sort of bracketed to a certain weight range, a certain amount of payload that they're designed to hold. All a spring's job is to sit there and just hold up weight. If a spring can support the weight properly, then the shock absorber can dampen and absorb the bumps. If that spring, let's say you're oversprung and that spring, you're just not really compressing it at all, it's just sort of like stiff, that shock absorber is not going to be able to work because it doesn't have any range to move because the spring's fighting it. So you're going to have a very harsh, jarring, bouncy, not really bouncy, but just harsh, jarring ride. If you are overloaded where you've just compressed the trash out of this spring and it's just not quite on the bump stops, but it's really squished down, your vehicle's gonna feel very sort of bouncy like this and just kind of have this kind of jello-y feeling to where the spring's not able to hold up the weight, so this poor shock absorber is trying to correct it, it just can't. So it's important to set your shocks up for success. all they want to do is control that vehicle and keep it stable. So give them the best chance they can by thinking about, you know what, every time I go camping, my truck just sits like this. My headlights are pointing up in the air. Everybody's flashing their brights at me. I can't see the road, and the steering feels sketchy because I have no weight over the front axle. And it's just horrible drive. Upgrade those rear springs. Just be aware that whatever that range is, let's say it's, your stock leaf pack in your pickup is only good for, additional 800 pounds of payload per leaf spring, which then gives you total payload of the rear axle, whatever the math is, right? And you've put more than that in the back. It's time to maybe go up another bracket in leaf springs. You could take that payload from, 0 to 800 and go more like a 400 to 1,000 leaf spring, right? So instead of being at the outer end of that, let me back up a little bit. If you think of springs as sort of having like goalposts, right? And when you're on the outer edge of the goalposts, springs don't feel great. They're either overdriven or under serving, and they're not doing great. You want to kind of be in the middle, in the sweet spot. I call it the butter zone of a spring. So it's compressing a little bit under load, but it's not squishing to the point where it's overloaded. Same thing with leaves. You want to be able to kind of be in that range. So if you just need to shift the goalposts this way slightly, so let's say your weight is here at a certain range, and I'm kind of maxing it out where, it's not great. Let's just move the goalposts slightly. So now my weight is in the middle of the spring range, and I'm kind of in that sweet spot. So weight's being supported properly, shocks can dampen the ride, the truck is just gonna drive like a dream. That's a little spring rate nerdery right there, but it's such a good thing to understand that you can overload a vehicle and you can fix it. It's pretty straightforward. You just gotta do those measurements. Another thing I like to do to get a good set of data to work with is load your vehicle up for a weekend, just put all the stuff in there that you plan on taking, and find one of these lonely little highway truck scales. You'll find them on like Highway 26, you'll find them on, on the way on 219, they're everywhere. Don't go one of the big interstate ones because you'll make everybody mad, but go to a little lonely highway truck scale and drive up to it. It's perfectly legal to do. No one's gonna get mad at you. This is as long as there's not a line of truckers waiting to do their thing. But just pull up to it, drive onto the scale. So just the scale is usually a big cement pad in the ground there, and usually having a big display that's kind of at the end of it. Drive onto the scale so just your front tires are on the scale, right? And see the weight on the display and just write that number down. And then drive forward so all 4 tires are on the scale, and then get your total vehicle weight, write that number down. Pull forward a little bit more so the front tires come off the scale and the back tires remain on the scale, and get your rear axle weight, record that. Then what you can do is on your driver's door, on most vehicles, there's going to be a little VIN plate or something. It will have kind of what your stock vehicle weight is supposed to be when it's unloaded. It'll also have kind of the GVM or the max weight it's designed for, and it'll usually say front axle max weight, total vehicle max weight, and rear axle max weight. That's a data set from the factory, pretty accurate, right? And then you just went on the scales, got another data set with all your junk in the trunk, and now you can compare the two numbers. Let's say my rear axle weight, payload capacity, total weight for that rear axle is 3,000 pounds, hypothetically. You go on that truck scale and you're like, wow, I'm at 36 for the rear axle. That explains why my truck is unhappy and feels horrible when I'm driving. That explains why my headlights are pointing up in the air, because you're 600 pounds over what the manufacturer says with stock suspension, stock springs, it's designed to handle. But now, instead of just just feeling it and kind of thinking like, oh, there might be something funky, and kind of seeing the vehicle and being like, oh, I can tell it's sagging a bit. Now you have hard data. You've got measurements for height, and you've got weight. And those are two good data points that you can go into any vehicle shop and just say, hey, I'm this many pounds overweight in the rear, not here, in the rear of the truck, and I sag this much every time I load it up for a weekend trip. And they can go in, they can take those two data points and be almost as perfect, as precise as knowing exactly what you need to fix, right? So if you know you're that 600 pounds over, cool, we'll go put you in this next bracket range of rear springs, and it'll be perfect. It's as simple as that, but without that hard data, it's guesswork. Until you unload the vehicle. Now that's another thing you need to consider, and thank you for bringing that up. So your vehicle is your four-wheel drive backpack. Set it up for as much success as you can. Most of us daily drive our vehicles as well. So there's going to be a trade-off at some point that you're going to go throughout your journey of building and outfitting your vehicle to where you're going to be adding things to it that are always going to be on it. Let's say you throw a winch on a bumper up front. That's weight that's always there. Cool. I know I've now added 180 pounds over the front axle. That usually will justify a spring upgrade in the front. And that's not really going to affect too much the daily driving. In fact, it's going to improve it because the front of the truck's going to be pretty overloaded. And it's going to help you when you load it up for a weekend as well. Now the rear axle, let's say you just have no weight in the rear and you load it up for a weekend and it's just sagging bad. Honestly, you may just get away with doing like a trim packer in the rear coil or a slight add leaf or like a helper spring or just something simple in the rear if you've got leaf springs. But let's say you do add a rack and a tent that kind of lives up on top of the truck, or you have like a nice drawer system in the back of your pickup, or a canopy, or whatever. You've just got some extra weight that's always in the back of the truck. Know how much weight that accessory is. Most manufacturers will give you the weight of the accessory. If you don't know, back to the truck scales, right? You know what your truck was stock because the VIN plate told you, and truck scale is going to tell you what that axle weight is today with your accessories on it. And if those are accessories that are always on the truck, make sure you're modifying the suspension if you need to suit that. Once you get that set up, 90% of your driving is going to be daily driving anyway. Your truck's going to be riding great. And then when you do load it up for a weekend, it'll sag less, it'll be much more composed, it'll be much better. So it's a bit of a trade-off. Now, if you've gone down the road and really modified the vehicle, it's still a daily driver. You can get a lot more precise because usually, on something that's more built out like this, your change of weight loaded up for a trip is maybe a couple 100 pounds, with food, bit of water in the tank, and that's it. So getting those data points, understanding how my truck is every day, with the accessories that I've put on it, or no accessories, and then understanding how much I usually put in for my average trip, and knowing those weights, and have them just recorded in your phone, on a Post-it note, whatever you do, have those data points. You now have a baseline for where the vehicle was, where it is today, now that I've got accessories, and what happens when I fully load it. At some point, you can look at those different weights and those different measurements and be like, you know what, I think I'm justified for a spring upgrade. I like to set the truck up for success for the most amount of driving it's going to see. If you have a vehicle that's just your weekend toy hauler and it's not your daily driver, great, set it up for that. But if you have a vehicle that you drive Monday through Friday to work and then you take it out on the weekends, set it up best suspension-wise and payload-wise for your most amount of driving, because you don't want to beat yourself up with an oversprung vehicle all week long to where it's the end of the week and you're just like, my kidneys, are turned into beef stew because I've just been on such hard springs all week. You want to enjoy driving your truck. You don't want to ruin your truck. So everything's a bit of a trade-off, but having those data points at least gives you the information to make smart, accurate decisions and takes away the guesswork. Because guesswork usually means you're going to spend more money in the wrong places, and you're going to do it more times than you should. So we work hard for our money. Things are not getting cheaper, so I like to buy things right the first time. I don't want to buy a solution to a problem I don't have. I want to fix the problem if there is a problem, and I want to do it right so the problem goes away. I don't want to play whack-a-mole and have the problem keep creeping up and having to deal with it again and then again and then again. That just gets really expensive and annoying. Also be conscious of variables like where your gas tank is. Is your gas tank full? Is it empty? So a lot of most Toyotas are designed for a right-hand drive market. It's a Japanese-made vehicle. It's designed to be perfectly balanced with a driver in it and a full tank of gas. So the gas tank is on the left side, the battery's on the left side, the driver sits on the right side, and we're a nice balanced truck. What's the problem with that? North America, we all drive on the left side. Well, the battery's still on the left side, the gas tank's still on the left side, and the big tub of guts is still in the driver's seat. I can justify that. So now I have, just from me existing in my vehicle, I've got a left lean, right? Because it's a truck that was designed for a right-hand drive market. So Toyotas, as you lift them, the left lean gets more pronounced and more exaggerated. So you have to correct it by adjusting the driver's side coil over a bit to give it a bit more preload, maybe putting a trim packer on the driver's side rear coil to give it a bit more so the truck sits level. Not a deal breaker if it's got a little bit of a lean. You can live with it, but you know what? Set it up for success. Set yourself up for success. Give yourself the best, most comfortable ride possible. So understanding and knowing your vehicle and things like the fuel tank, because fuel is heavy. It's nice and down low, but most four-wheel drives can't put a fuel tank in the middle because you got a big drive line there, right? So it's going to be to one side, or they'll put them, over the rear axle, right? Which is a lot of weight over the rear. Yeah. So you know, okay, well I don't have as much rear payload now because I got a full tank of gas. So it's good to, when you do your data capture, eliminate as many variables as you possibly can. And I always say, go into it with a full tank of gas. So fill your tank up, do your measurements, then you know with a full tank of gas, I'm here. There's no point in measuring it with a half empty, quarter empty, just full tank of gas. That's the worst case scenario. That's when it's going to be its heaviest, full tank of gas. Even just as simple as adding rear bumpers with swing outs. Yeah, there's great utility, allows you to put stuff in a lot of neat places and mount things to the vehicle. Obviously protection for the vehicle, recovery points, and just a lot of utility, but that comes at a weight penalty, right? That bumper, its system itself is gonna add, say, 250 pounds to the back of the truck. Then whatever you load onto that rear bumper, let's say you're taking your spare tire out from underneath and now hanging it on that bumper, great place to put it, right? Because it's easier to get to, but you just took weight that was nice and low and moved it up higher and you moved it further back. So there's trade-offs. Every little thing we do to our vehicles from the factory, any kind of modification is going to sacrifice something to gain something. And it's up to you, the vehicle owner, to understand that and understand, is that sacrifice worth it? Most of the time, yeah. Right, most of the time, honestly. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But there comes a threshold where it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. For me personally, I want one, but I'm not going to do it. I don't have a rear bumper with giant swing outs on my 4Runner. I just keep the spare tire underneath. There was only one instance in my entire life of owning this vehicle for 15 years where it was annoying to have the spare tire down low underneath. One time. Every other time it was fine. I could get to it, no big deal. It was in its stock location, and I didn't have the weight penalty of another 250 pounds of armor in the back, rear swing arms, whatever. But that was a personal choice. That's something that I didn't have to take that withdrawal from my weight bank, and I could put that back into putting more fuel in the truck, more stuff in the cargo area, and not have to, upgrade springs. One more thing I want to talk about with weight is anytime you add a lot of weight to the vehicle, the drivetrain is going to be working harder to move that weight, and your brakes are going to be working harder to stop that weight. So there's going to come a point where your vehicle is not going to stop very well because you've added bigger wheels and tires. That's greater rotating mass, more inertia. You've got just a ton of stuff on the truck. You're going to start feeling some mushy brakes, or on long descents, on long grades, you're going to start overheating your brakes, and you'll start feeling a little shudder in your front, in your steering wheel, and that's just your rotors is getting really hot and starting to warp a little bit. That's the truck saying, hey, you've kind of cool that we're going on this fun trip, thank you, but you've overloaded me a little bit too much and now my brakes suck. So then you got to spend more money to upgrade the brakes, usually the front brakes. Too much weight means that your poor transmission, is just hunting for gears continuously just to go 65 on the freeway. It's just constantly shifting, and you're not getting into a nice overdrive gear. Or just your acceleration's really bad, or just fifth gear is just useless because you're just like, I can't even get up to overdrive. That's usually due to weight, because usually the transmission is spec'd for a certain range of payload for the vehicle, and now you're thinking, well, dang, now I got to re-gear my axles so I can get back into my sweet gear ratio range so my transmission's happy. And you start going that rabbit hole of modifying a lot of things on your truck, all because of weight. So weight is the enemy. We want to control and mitigate as much as we can. Always think of accessories that give you more than one use. If I'm going to put a shovel in my truck, it's not just for recovery, it's for digging a hole when I got to poop, right? It gives me multiple uses. It's a tool that gives me more things. Recovery boards, it's not just for recovery, it's for when I get into camp, I can put them underneath the tire, level the truck out, now my tent's not leaning to one side. Try to get more uses out of gear, and try to, one thing I like to do as part of my annual discipline is, once a year, I'll empty out absolutely everything in the truck, lay it all out, and you'll realize that you'll have stuff in there that you never knew you did. You're like, oh, there's that 10mm socket. Been missing that for a while. Or you'll find things that have been in there since the dawn of time, and you're just like, why am I carrying this thing around? I've never used it. I actually forgot I had it in the truck. Or you'll be looking for something, and you'll unload absolutely everything from the truck, and you're thinking, where the heck is my flashlight that always is in here? Could be missing, right? It gives you a chance to reassess the weight that you have in there, to resupply the gear that you have in there, to put things away maybe a little bit smarter, distribute things a little bit smarter. And at the end of the day, you're gonna have a safer handling vehicle, which is a more comfortable drive and a much better backcountry experience. But just be always thinking, anytime I do something to my truck, I'm withdrawing from the bank of reliability and payload and sacrificing that to gain something else. A lift, I can put bigger tires on, I gain a bit of ground clearance, I can get out into some different trails and don't have to worry about scraping the vehicle. Roof rack, I'm gaining a lot more utility on the top. I can mount accessories like an awning, which is nice and lightweight or whatever. But now I've lost a little bit of aerodynamics, so on the highway, my fuel economy is gonna start dropping a little bit. Everything has a cost. Not just the financial cost, but just the cost of how the vehicle performs. So as long as we deal with that, as long as we can manage that, and as long as we create good data every time we modify or touch our vehicle in any kind of way, you'll be able to make much smarter, better decisions about, adjusting suspension components, figuring out what I need to do to my vehicle next or what I shouldn't do. Going up in tire size is something that we all do, but again, worse braking, need to re-gear at some point. So understand that you don't necessarily have to have 35s, 37s just because everybody on Instagram has 35 and 37s. So do what's smart that makes sense for your vehicle. Anyway, I hope this helped. I hope, nobody fell asleep too much. You stayed awake.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm proud of you. Thank you guys very much again. I'll stick around for a bit. Appreciate you guys coming out.